It's not fair!
I'd like to call to order this secret conclave of America's media empires. We're here to come up with the next phony baloney crisis to put Americans back where they belong, in dark rooms glued to their televisions, too terrified to skip the commercials.
Well, I think...
NBC, you are here to listen and not speak. I think we should go with a good old-fashioned public health scare.
A new disease. No one's immune. It's like the summer of the shark, except instead of a shark, it's an epidemic. And instead of summer, it's all the time.
That is smoking.
Now, I hate to be the guy who derails what everybody else loves.
He loves being that guy.
But, Janice, we do have standards. This can't be a made-up disease. The only moral thing to do is release a deadly virus into the general public.
We do have something we've been holding on to, but it hasn't been tested. Get over here, NBC.
Well, we certainly believe in testing, but Wow. Oh, yeah.
So, we've got our deadly disease. Now, we just have to blame it on something that's in every household, something that people are a little bit afraid of already. House cat flu is coming, people. The Center for Disease Disinformation predicts with some degree of probability that the house cat flu might spread in the following hypothetical outbreak pattern. So petter beware, that warm body on your lap just might be ready to destroy your tender fiddles.
Donald, do you get the flu shot every year?
No.
Why?
No, I don't know. I've never had one. And thus far, I've never had the flu. I don't like the idea of injecting bad stuff into your body, which is basically what they do. And I guess this one has not been very effective to start off with, but the last one. But I've never had a flu shot, and I've never had the flu. I better knock on wood. Where's some wood around?
How is it that you've never had the flu with all the business you've done over the years? You're always shaking hands. That's how you get sick.
I am shaking hands, and I just don't understand it myself. But I have friends that religiously get the flu shot, and then they get the flu. You know, that helps my thinking because I say, why am I doing this? And then I've seen a lot of reports that the last flu shot is virtually totally ineffective.
Bring that perspective to the topic today is the issue of pandemic preparedness. And if there's one message that I want to leave with you today, based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak.
I think an epidemic, either naturally caused or intentionally caused, is the most likely thing to cause, say, 10 million excess deaths, and that it's pretty surprising how little preparedness there is for it.
You've invested $10 billion in vaccinations over the last 2 decades, and you figured out the return on investment for that, and it kind of stunned me. Can you walk us through the math?
Over a 20-to-1 return. So if you just look at the economic benefits, that's a pretty strong number compared to anything else.
I think the numbers that you ran through were if you had put that money into an S&P 500 and reinvested the dividends, you'd come up with something like $17 billion, but you think it's $200 billion.
Here, yeah.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. Experts agree unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere.
We're at the start of what's looking like it will be a severe pandemic. And there are problems emerging that can only be solved by global business and governments working together. So the policy crisis in question for this board in this meeting is this: how should governments, business, and international organizations allocate and distribute pandemic antivirals and medical supplies to the people who need them most?
A global stockpile would certainly help ensure more rational and strategic allocation, but the reality is that we don't have the logistics capability, even within the UN, to bring that together in one place and run it. So this is where I think a collaboration between the international organizations like the World Health Organization and the private sector, which runs these supply chains for many purposes every day, understand where the supplies are, make smart decisions about how to allocate them to the people who need them in the places that need them the most, and then work with the industry to move those supplies from where they are today to where they need to be.
Public health agencies have issued travel advisories, while some countries have banned travel from the worst affected areas. As a result, the travel sector is taking a huge hit. Travel bookings are down 45%, and many flights have been canceled. A ripple effect is racing through the service sector. Governments that rely on travel and tourism as a large part of their economies are being hit particularly hard.
It's really important to get those industries and their trade associations and an efficient leadership established, which is decentralized, but has a collective responsibility and accountability. And that needs to be supported by the public leadership.
You know, there's a whole complex set of issues in a highly interdependent world on supply chains that are just in time. We need to think about how much flex there is in that just-in-time supply chain system and make sure it keeps running. I think it's going to take specificity, and it's going to take knowledge that only the private sector has. The UN can play an important coordinating facilitation role, but the companies know where those commodities are, where they move, how to move them, and that's where a type of public-private collaboration that we have not generally had in these crises needs to be put together pretty quickly.
Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of dis and misinformation circulating over the internet. In some cases, limited internet shutdowns are being implemented to quell panic.
How much control of information should there be, and by whom? And how can false information be effectively challenged? And what if that false information is coming from companies or from governments?
I think it's very important that we make sure that there is concise communication with all healthcare facilities where these patients are being treated so that there isn't mass panic.
We're at a moment where the social media platforms have to step forward and recognize the moment to assert that they're a technology platform and not a broadcaster is over. They, in fact, have to be a participant in broadcasting accurate information and partnering with the scientific and health communities to counterweight, if not flood the zone, of accurate information, because to put the genie back in the bottle of the misinformation and disinformation is nigh impossible.
One thing we haven't spoken about, and I'm wondering whether it's time to talk about this, is a step up from the part of the governments on enforcement actions against fake news.
Jeffrey Epstein may be dead, but this story isn't. A shocking new report from the New York Times sheds light on the connection between Microsoft founder Bill Gates and the late Jeffrey Epstein. After Gates' name came up in connection with Epstein and MIT Media Lab, Gates gave a statement to the Wall Street Journal where he insisted he did not have any business relationship or friendship with Epstein. But new reporting from the New York Times outlines numerous meetings between Gates and Epstein and a conversation with Bill and Melinda Gates' foundation, a connection between their foundation and JP Morgan to set up a charitable fund that would financially benefit Epstein.
A small firm recently embedded microchips in their employees as a way to bypass company badges and corporate logons and to get attention for their cafeteria kiosks, which are available on a cashless payment plan like Apple Pay. Chip proponents tell us that having a chip in the hand is better than grabbing for the cell phone because you can never forget it and you can't lose it, and you have the capability to communicate with machines in a way we couldn't before.
When I think of the great scientific revolutions of the past, print, the steam engine, aviation, the atomic age, I think of new tools that we acquired, but over which we, the human race, had the advantage, which we controlled. And that is not necessarily the case in the digital age. You may keep your secrets from your friends, from your parents, your children, your doctor, even your personal trainer. But it takes real effort to conceal your thoughts from Google. And if that is true today, in future, there may be nowhere to hide. Smart cities will pullulate with sensors, all joined together by the Internet of Things. Bollards communing invisibly with lampposts. But this technology could also be used to keep every citizen under round-the-clock surveillance. A future Alexa will pretend to take orders, but this Alexa will be watching you, clucking her tongue and stamping her foot. In future, voice connectivity will be in every room and almost every object. Your mattress will monitor your nightmares, your fridge will beep for more cheese, your front door will sweep wide the moment you approach like some silent butler, and every one of them minutely transcribing your every habit in tiny electronic shorthand, stored not in their chips or in their innards, nowhere you can find it, but in some great cloud of data that lowers ever more oppressively over the human race. Can these algorithms be trusted with our lives and hopes? Should the machines, and only the machines, decide whether or not we are eligible for a mortgage or insurance, or what surgery or medicines we should receive? Are we doomed to a cold and heartless future in which computer says yes or computer says no, with the grim finality of an emperor in the arena? How do you plead with an algorithm? How do you get it to see extenuating circumstances? And how do we know that the machines have not been insidiously programmed to fool us or even to cheat us? We're already using all kinds of messaging services that offer instant communication at minimal cost. And these same programs, platforms, could also be designed for real-time censorship of every conversation, with offending words automatically deleted. Indeed, in some countries, this happens today. Digital authoritarianism is not, alas, the stuff of dystopian fantasy, but of an emerging reality. And there are today people who are still actually anti-science. A whole movement called the anti-vaxxers, who refuse to acknowledge the evidence that vaccinations have eradicated smallpox, and who, by their prejudices, are actually endangering the very children they want to protect. And I totally reject this anti-scientific pessimism. I'm profoundly optimistic about the ability of new technology to serve as a liberator and to remake the world wondrously and benignly.
But then we also talk about removing information that is problematic. Of course, anything that is medically unsubstantiated, anything that would go against World Health Organization recommendations would be a violation of our policy. And so remove is another really important part.
Last week, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg explained that protests like these are no longer protected political speech. They're, quote, misinformation.
We do classify that as harmful misinformation, and we take that down.
Harmful misinformation. That is a phrase familiar to anyone who has watched totalitarian regimes in any country. It's now how Mark Zuckerberg describes political opinions he doesn't like.
How do you spot fake news about COVID-19?
Right now, there's so much misinformation out there, it's difficult to tell what's real and what's not. That's why you should be looking for an official seal of approval. For example, it's from the NHS or the government, and it's been reported by a trusted news source.
Say a small group of people control the narratives and the content that we all see on all the channels. It makes you feel like, oh, I have lots of choices, but you don't. Who's telling them what to put on those channels?
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility
is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities, the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about the trouble and trying to get responsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
To push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Starting in 1900, we entered a previously unimaginable time of modern technology. Advances that allowed the rulers of this world to construct and direct our stories in ways we previously never imagined. As a result, new techniques to control the population were realized. These are the people from the companies that we have trusted to deliver us our news and tell our stories. This has always been about controlling what we as the population think and hear. They help create our culture and influence our society. We as citizens only trust them because as a society, we think that the gatekeepers have our best interest in mind.
The dangerous, edges here are that he's trying to undermine the media, trying to make up his own facts, and it could be that while unemployment and the economy worsens, he could have undermined the messaging so much that he can actually control exactly what people think, and that is our job. That is our job. That is our job. Our job.
The media companies in today's world connected back to Washington, so I started looking. It was like a family tree. The connections between our government personnel and the media corporations was unbelievable. Google, Amazon, Netflix, Twitter, CNN, ABC. So what would happen if all these companies had the same political ideology or agenda?
This is yet another attempt to impeach the president. And sadly, it seems they care very little for any of the destruction they are leaving in their wake. We must test for the virus in order to stop the spread of it. What could be a very great recession, some predicting even a depression.
At worst case scenario, it could be the flu.
I feel like the more I learn about this, the less there is to worry about.
I was about to say the same thing. We don't have immunity to this virus. It's a new virus. It's a pandemic strain of a virus we haven't seen before.
All the talk about coronavirus being so much more deadly doesn't reflect reality. Without a vaccine, the flu would be far more deadly. We are facing an incredibly contagious and dangerous virus that is moving across the world from one hotspot to another.
We're going to call out anyone and everyone who's using this virus as a political weapon against the president. The standard flu every single year kills tens of thousands of Americans. We are now entering what will be the crucial defining 15-day period as it relates to this virus, where we must slow the spread of coronavirus.
It's actually the safest time to fly. Everyone I know that's flying right now
terminals are pretty much dead. We have a responsibility to slow down this virus and to think of other people during this time. And so if you can keep your distance and prevent someone from getting close to you that might be sick, you can save your family, you can save the elderly, and help our country as a nation.
It is absolutely disgusting that Democrats are seeking to use this complex virus to score cheap political points. This dangerous health crisis could dovetail quickly into a political crisis, already feeling economic ramifications of it all.
You filled up your gas tank lately, then you don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you gas prices are back on the rise.
You don't need us to tell you that gas prices are back on the rise.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Millions of Americans staying at home are relying on Amazon.
Amazon has transformed its operations in response to COVID-19 to protect employees and keep packages flowing.
Amazon has transformed its operations in response to COVID-19 to protect employees and keep packages flowing.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy while still delivering those packages to your doorstep.
The company is keeping employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy. The company is keeping its employees safe and healthy.
It spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
It has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
It has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
It has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
Amazon says it has spent $800 million on increased wages and overtime pay during the pandemic.
Every single one of Amazon's workforce of nearly 1 million people has played a critical role in making these changes happen.
I hope that they feel that passion that we have for safety,
so they can stay safe and healthy while you do too.
I'm declaring a public health emergency of international concern over the global outbreak of novel coronavirus. The main reason for this declaration is not because of what is happening in China, but because of what is happening in other countries. Our greatest concern is the potential for the virus to spread to countries with weaker health systems and which are ill prepared to deal with it. Let me be clear. This declaration is not a vote of no confidence in China. On the contrary, WHO continues to have a confidence in China's capacity to control the outbreak. I'll repeat this. Let me be clear. This declaration is not a vote of no confidence in China. On the contrary, WHO continues to have confidence in China's capacity to control the outbreak.
It's also, though, useful to put the scale of this crisis in perspective. We noticed the US health journalist Liz Szabo saying, look, there have been 425 deaths from coronavirus all over the world. Meanwhile, 10,000 Americans have died from the flu this season, and flu season hasn't even peaked. Now, worldwide, flu kills over 600,000 people a year. There are up to 5 million cases of it each year. You could compare that to the roughly 20,000 cases of coronavirus at the moment. Yet, because of these cases, 22 countries have introduced trade and/or travel restrictions. Here's the World Health Organization on that.
Such restrictions can have the effect of increasing fear and stigma with little public health benefit.
This is a vital update about coronavirus.
To help save lives, stay at home.
Anyone can spread coronavirus. You should now only go out when absolutely necessary for food, medicine, work, or exercise. Always try to stay 2 meters apart. Do not meet others outside your household, even friends and family.
Stay home. Protect the NHS. Save lives.
There's been some discussion about China and what they knew and when they knew it, and I've been very critical. We need to know immediately. The world is entitled to know. The Chinese government was the first to know of this risk to the world, and that puts a special obligation to make sure that the data gets to our scientists, our professionals. This is not about retribution. This matters going forward. We're in a live exercise here. We're in a live exercise here.
Wuhan, mid-November, and first cases of a strange new flu start surfacing. From early December, Chinese authorities say the new virus has arisen from a local live fish and animal market. They're adamant it's not SARS or anything like it. Anyone who suggests otherwise is suppressed. On New Year's Eve, an official announcement. The closure of the wet market has stopped the spread of the disease, and there is no evidence of human-to-human infection of the virus.
And now to Australia, where the nation's Prime Minister today threw his support behind an independent probe into the pandemic. He says all member nations of the WHO should support a review and be obliged to participate in it.
Australian leader Scott Morrison said on Thursday that all member nations of the WHO should support an independent review into the coronavirus pandemic's origins and spread. It's a move that could put further strain on ties with China. Australia has become one of Beijing's most forceful critics over the handling of the spread of the coronavirus. Beijing has called these efforts US-led propaganda against China. But Morrison defended calls for the inquiry as earnest in nature.
The struggle against epidemics is a global one, for the danger of death is worldwide. Then, what is the answer? Within the framework of the United Nations, a new organization exists to promote the welfare of all people, the World Health Organization.
The WHO was born in 1948 from a post-war determination that disease was just another enemy that the world, united, could defeat.
The quarantine service can't keep every plane and passenger grounded for several days. Today, epidemics must be crushed at the very source.
But faced with the greatest challenge in its history, the coronavirus, the WHO's critics, led by Donald Trump, have declared it a failure.
Today, I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus.
There's almost universal acceptance that China covered up the outbreak of coronavirus in Wuhan, potentially turning a local epidemic into the catastrophic pandemic it has become. The question is, was the WHO and particularly its Director General, Dr. Tedros, aware of China's great lie?
The Chinese government is to be congratulated for the extraordinary measures it has taken to contain the outbreak.
US Congressman Michael McCaul is the most senior Republican on the Foreign Affairs Committee and former chairman of Homeland Security. And he is gunning for the WHO's Director General, Dr. Tedros. Even Professor Gostin agrees that China covered up. But he says they did it to everyone, including the World Health Organization.
And messages and signals to the WHO. We try to help.
In this global calamity, there was one canary in the coal mine, Taiwan. In December last year, Taiwanese experts and intelligence sources detected a mystery virus outbreak in Wuhan, one that might be transmitted between humans, requiring cases to be isolated. On December 31st, Taiwan tried to warn the World Health Organization by email, but it was ignored. Kolos Yutaka is the spokesperson for Taiwan's national cabinet.
On the one hand, we wanted to get more information from the WHO. On the other, we wanted to share our observations with them. But we just couldn't get through the door.
With no response from the WHO, but knowing something was seriously wrong in Wuhan, Taiwan went into lockdown a full month before the WHO finally declared the coronavirus outbreak a global health emergency. As a result, Taiwan, with a population of 26 million, has just over 400 infections and 6 deaths in total.
Would the WHO consider Taiwan's membership? Hello?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I couldn't hear your question.
Okay, yeah. Let me repeat the question.
No, that's okay. Let's move to another one then.
Right, because I'm actually curious on talking about Taiwan as well, on Taiwan's case.
We decided to give Dr. Alward another call to follow up.
And I just want to see if you can comment a bit on how Taiwan has done so far in terms of containing the virus.
Well, we've already talked about China, and when you look across all the different areas of China, they've actually all done quite a good job. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting us to participate, and good luck as you go forward with the battle in Hong Kong.
There's no doubt that all the nations in our post-pandemic world need to make some serious decisions about the WHO.
Ever since the pandemic broke out, he has constantly sung China's praises.
I left inspired and with a deep admiration for, the common Chinese people that I worked with. If I had COVID-19, I want to be treated in China.
Lin Shejia, the CEO of the Foundation of Medical Professionals Alliance, lamented that the WHO has been deeply poisoned by Chinese influence. He said he believed that once the pandemic was over, each nation would seriously consider how to reform these kinds of international organisations that have been heavily infiltrated by China.
Sunday night, the WHO released a response to the controversy. It said, the Taiwanese caseload is low relative to population. We continue to follow developments closely. WHO is taking lessons learned from all areas, including Taiwanese health authorities, to share best practices globally. It remarked that the question of Taiwanese membership in WHO is up to WHO member states, not WHO staff.
We've seen the Chinese government rudely and unreasonably pressuring Taiwan on the international stage. They're putting political considerations over people's health and safety. This basically is extremely vile.
A Bankstown mother and daughter have been charged after a fight over toilet paper in Woolworths. The vision of the shoppers arguing with another woman went viral as supermarkets impose new purchase limits to curb coronavirus hysteria.
The fight over toilet paper that went viral around the world.
I just want one pack. No, not one pack.
Now the 60-year-old mother and her 23-year-old daughter, who were wheeling a trolley full of rolls at Woolworths Chullora, have been charged with a fray and are due in court next month. The incident, one of several at Australian supermarkets, as desperation for toilet paper reaches irrational levels.
We can all get enough toilet paper if we all calm down a little bit.
So while Elmo eats his breakfast, we should get started. This is the ABCs of COVID-19, a CNN and Sesame Street special.
Hi everyone, I'm Erica Hill, along with my friends Dr. Sanjay Gupta and Big Bird. And today we're going to discuss COVID-19 and its effect on children and families.
Well, you said COVID-19. Well, what is COVID-19? Is it just a bunch of letters and numbers?
That's such a great question, Big Bird. Those letters and numbers reference something that's making people sick. You know, you may have also heard it called the coronavirus.
Oh, yeah. Is the coronavirus why we have to stay at home?
Yep, that's right, Big Bird. COVID-19 has become a pandemic, and that means it's spread to large numbers of people all over the world.
I suspect you have an opinion.
A point of view, I would say.
Okay.
I would say. So I'm broadly scientifically literate, but what I will say of this virus, I think we're in the middle of a massive experiment worldwide. And that
where are the guinea pigs?
Maybe the experiment is, will people listen to scientists? In this case, referring to medical professionals?
Medical professionals.
In this particular case?
Say Anthony Fauci over at Allergy and Infectious Disease.
For example, and are you washing your hands? And are you taking these precautions? These are warnings offered by scientists.
You should not go out even to...
A crucial projection study helped convince the British government to impose stricter measures against the coronavirus this week. The study, led by Imperial College, painted a worst-case picture of hundreds of thousands of deaths and a health service overwhelmed with severely sick patients. It used new data gathered from Italy, the worst infected country in Europe, and compared the potential impact of COVID-19 with the devastating 1918 flu outbreak. It concluded that the outbreak could have caused more than 500,000 deaths in Britain, but the scientists say that with the containment measures, including extreme social distancing, the epidemic's curve and peak could be flattened.
Then you should stay at home.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson shut down social life in the UK on Monday and ordered the most vulnerable to isolate for 12 weeks. The government said on Monday it had accelerated its plans based on the advice of the experts. But according to those involved with the decision, this study helped change the British government's position.
We will have to maintain some level of social distancing, significant level of social distancing, probably indefinitely until we have a vaccine available.
But a key government advisor says reopening the country whilst shielding the elderly would send the death rate shooting up.
If you just achieve, for instance, 80% shielding, 80% reduction in infection risk in those groups, we'd still project you get well over 100,000 deaths later this year through that sort of strategy.
Professor Neil Ferguson, the epidemiologist who helped shape Britain's coronavirus lockdown strategy, has also had to quit after his married lover came a couple of times to visit him at his home. A booty call.
It is just such a staggering level of hypocrisy. And I think it really demonstrates that there is a certain section of society, the kind of clever, privileged elite, who think that certain rules should apply to us, the plebs, but not necessarily to them. So there's a real arrogance to this.
It is the type of breathtaking hypocrisy that makes you understand why the public holds so many experts and politicians and other public figures in total disregard. Professor Neil Ferguson, Professor Lockdown, he was called the man that got us into these draconian measures in the first place as a result of his, I would say, quite dodgy scientific modelling, has been caught not following social distancing procedures. Dr. Hilary Jones, as you can tell, I'm heated today. I'm angry about this, and I think the British public are angry. How do you feel about it?
Well, of course, Dan, you can't have people advising the public on what not to do and what to do and then doing something completely different yourself. So to do this for his own, social gratification flies in the face of everything that we've been told. And of course, it's galling. It's hypocritical. It's illogical. And it's sort of one rule for one and another rule for everybody else.
The initial estimates of death rates from COVID-19 came from now disgraced Neil Ferguson of the Imperial College of London. Ferguson was behind the disputed research that sparked the mass culling of 11 million sheep and cattle during the 2001 outbreak of so-called foot and mouth disease. He also predicted that up to 150,000 people could die. There were fewer than 200 deaths. In 2002, Ferguson predicted that up to 50,000 people would likely die from exposure to BSE, mad cow disease, in beef. In the UK, there were only 177 deaths from BSE. In 2005, Ferguson predicted that up to 150 million people could be killed from bird flu. In the end, only 282 people died worldwide from the disease between 2003 and 2009. In 2009, a government estimate based on Ferguson's advice said a reasonable worst-case scenario was that the swine flu would lead to 65,000 British deaths. In the end, swine flu killed 457 people in the UK. And this year, his estimates were that 200,000 people in the UK, 2 million in the US, and millions more deaths worldwide would occur. In March, Ferguson admitted that his Imperial College model of COVID-19 was based on undocumented 13-year-old computer code that was intended to be used for a feared influenza pandemic rather than a coronavirus. Ferguson declined to release his original code so other scientists could check his results. He only released a heavily revised set of code recently after a 6-week delay. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation paid the Imperial College over $79 million for this fiasco, including millions more in funding for nearly every member of Trump's coronavirus team, including Dr. Fauci.
So the CDC issued new guidelines today in a 60-page report after we have all been wiping down our groceries, leaving stuff outside, that in this new report, they found that the virus, quote, does not spread easily from touching surfaces or objects.
You don't get tested unless you're in need of medical help. So of course I don't know if I've had it, but I isolated myself anyway, and because it is the right thing to do. People are starting to realize that we are actually depending on science and that we need to listen to scientists and experts, and I really hope that that stays.
Federal investigators at the Lexington home of 60-year-old Dr. Charles Lieber today, moments after his arrest at his Harvard office.
The complaint alleges that Dr. Lieber signed a contract with the Chinese university in Wuhan and was paid up to $50,000 per month, plus up to $158,000 in living expenses.
The chair of Harvard's chemistry department, he also allegedly received more than $1.5 million to set up a research lab in China, all while working at Harvard and receiving multiple research grants from the U.S. Department of Defense and National Institutes of Health. Also charged today, 2 Chinese nationals, 29-year-old Yang Qingyi, who worked as a scientific researcher at Boston University,
who failed to mention on her visa application that she is also a lieutenant with the People's Liberation Army.
30-year-old Zhaozong Zhang worked on cancer research at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center.
For trying to smuggle vials of biological material out of the United States to China and lying about it to federal investigators.
Now, Lieber is due back in court Thursday. He's currently behind bars. He could face up to 5 years in prison if convicted. And Harvard does tell me he's currently on paid administrative leave. Meantime, Harvard, Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, and BU are all cooperating with authorities. Reporting live in South Boston, Nicole Burley, WCVB News Center 5.
3 people tied to universities and a hospital in the Boston area were indicted on charges that they lied about their ties to China. Prosecutors say that these separate cases point to the ongoing threat of Chinese espionage here in the U.S. Prosecutors say that the individuals attempted to steal research in order to bring it back to China. The first is a Harvard University professor, Dr. Charles Lieber. Prosecutors say he had a contract with a top Chinese university. He also ran a group which had contracts with the Department of Defense and the National Institutes of Health. Federal agents say Lieber lied about his ties to China when he bid on those contracts.
China is engaged in a massive, long-term campaign to steal U.S. research and technology for its own uses.
Harvard responded to Dr. Lieber's indictment, writing, "The charges brought by the U.S. government against Professor Lieber are extremely serious. Harvard is cooperating with federal authorities, including the National Institutes of Health, and is initiating its own review of the alleged misconduct." Professor Lieber has been placed on indefinite administrative leave. Also indicted is a Chinese national who was working as a researcher at Boston University. The U.S. attorney says that she's also a member of the Chinese military, but that she failed to disclose that. The third is a researcher sponsored by Harvard, doing research at Beth Israel, who's accused of attempting to smuggle biological materials back to China. Officials say customs found 21 vials stuffed into a sock when he was trying to leave the country.
Harvard scientist accused of lying about his ties to China is now free.
As he fought for his release, the FBI put out a bulletin for a former BU researcher who's charged with hiding the fact that she was in the Chinese army. WBZ's Tiffany Chan has the story.
Dr. Charles Lieber was able to post that $1 million cash bail, walking out of federal court today alongside his wife and lawyers. He didn't have much to say about the federal charges against him for lying to federal agents about his ties to China. Jennifer, do you have anything to say about the charges here? The former Harvard professor was straight-faced walking out of Moakley Federal Courthouse. He was put on administrative leave after he was indicted for allegedly lying about his work with the Chinese government-run program designed to steal U.S. research. The U.S. attorney said Lieber was paid $50,000 a month, many times in cash. Prosecutors stressed that China is the #1 threat to research theft, issuing this FBI wanted poster for Yang King-Ye. The 29-year-old was indicted Tuesday, accused of lying about her ties to the Chinese military to get a student visa at Boston University to work as a researcher. She's wanted for sending U.S. military and research documents back to her superiors before escaping to China. Dr. Lieber and his wife also had to surrender their passports after the judge expressed concerns that they could be a flight risk. Prosecutors say there is a major threat to research theft here, and while most researchers are here to work under good faith, many are working for the Chinese government. Outside of federal court, I'm Tiffany Chan for WBZ News.
Breaking news this morning on a story that we have been following. A professor at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland has been arrested over his alleged financial ties to China. This just days after the FBI sounded the alarm on China's attempts to steal coronavirus research. A professor at the University of Arkansas was arrested on similar charges last week. And then in January, Harvard's chemistry chief was charged with failing to disclose that he, too, was being paid by the Chinese Communist Party. 2 weeks ago, Senator Tom Cotton told us that the CCP was trying in many ways to steal medical data from the United States to try and come up with a vaccine for COVID-19 before the United States.
Harvard has announced the university will not accept the $9 million in relief funds allotted to it by the CARES Act. On Tuesday, President Trump demanded the university pay the money back, but Harvard declined to do so. Amid mounting pressure from the president and several lawmakers, Harvard decided to decline the funding. President Trump stated on Tuesday he didn't like that Harvard was to receive relief money when the institution has about a $40 billion endowment or investment fund.
I don't like it. This is meant for workers. This isn't meant for one of the richest institutions, not only far beyond schools, in the world. They got to pay it back. I want them to pay it back.
关于新冠病毒源头和传播途径问题，中方立场是明确的。我们始终认为这是一个科学问题，应该交由科学家和医学专家去研究。我想提醒你注意的是，世卫组织负责人已经多次表示，没有任何证据表明新冠病毒是在实验室产生的。世界上很多知名医学专家也都认为，所谓实验室泄露等说法毫无科学依据。
Group of highly qualified evolutionary virologists looked at the sequences there and the sequences in bats as they evolve, and the mutations that it took to get to the point where it is now is totally consistent with a jump of a species from an animal to a human. So, I mean, the paper will be available. I don't have the authors right now, but we can make that available too.
Do any of the investigations show that the virus originated in Wuhan or from the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
实际上，我们很清楚，做这个研究的人很清楚，
As people who carry out viral studies, we clearly know what kind of research is going on at the Institute and how the Institute manages viruses and samples. As we said early on, there's no way this virus came from us. We have a strict regulatory regimen, we have a code of conduct for research, so we are confident of that.
There's speculation that the Wuhan Institute of Virology could be the origin of the CCP virus. It's a P4 lab, the highest biosafety level. The Washington Post reported in January 2018 that the American embassy visited the lab and saw it was studying bat coronaviruses. They said the lab's security measures were insufficient and alerted Washington.
U.S. intelligence officials have concluded COVID-19 was, quote, not man-made or genetically modified. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence has been looking into this. In a statement Thursday, it said U.S. policymakers have been provided with critical support from the intelligence community, adding that it will, quote, continue to rigorously examine emerging information about the origins of the outbreak.
There's enormous evidence that that's where this began. We've said from the beginning that this was a virus that originated in Wuhan, China. We took a lot of grief for that from the outset, but I think the whole world can see now. Remember, China has a history of infecting the world, and they have a history of running substandard laboratories.
And my question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. And I think that the World Health Organization should be ashamed of themselves, because they're like the public relations agency for China. It's still, they shouldn't be making excuses when people make horrible mistakes, especially mistakes that are causing hundreds of thousands of people around the world to die. I think the World Health Organization should be ashamed of themselves.
On China, a moment ago you said that China, it's possible they could have chosen not to stop the spread of the virus. Are you insinuating they intentionally let it spread?
Well, they could have done it, and I'm just saying, well, one of two things happened. They either didn't do it, and they couldn't do it from a competent standpoint, or they let it spread. And I would say probably it got out of control. But there's another case that how come they stopped all the planes and all of the traffic from going into China, but they didn't stop the planes and the traffic from coming into the United States and from coming into all over Europe. But then we noticed a virus, and it's not acceptable what happened. It came out of China, and it's not acceptable what happened. And now what we're doing, Jim, is we're finding out how it came out. Different forms. You've heard all different things. You've heard 3 or 4 different concepts as to how it came out. We should have the answer to that in the not-too-distant future, and that will determine a lot how I feel about China. Well, something happened. Something happened. I don't say misleading or not. I'll let you know that. I mean, I'll be able to give you that answer at some point in the hopefully not-too-distant future. But I will tell you, you take a look at what happened to this world. A month and a half, 2 months ago, we had the strongest economy in the history of the world, and all of a sudden I have to close the economy, I have to close the country.
But I will echo the president's displeasure with China. It's no secret that China mishandled this situation. Just a few examples for you. They did not share the genetic sequence until a professor in Shanghai did so on his own the very next day. China shut down his lab for, quote, rectification. They slow-walked information on human-to-human transmission alongside the World Health Organization and didn't let U.S. investigators in at a very important time.
Also, will you pledge never to lie to us from that podium?
I will never lie to you. You have my word on that.
How's this for a slap? This week, Australia was described as chewing gum on the boot of China that needed to be scraped off on a rock. The insult came from an influential Chinese newspaper editor backed by the Communist Party. Our crime? We're troublemakers because our government is calling for an independent inquiry into the origins and spread of coronavirus. Well, why is it that China finds it hostile, finds it so offensive for an independent international inquiry into the origins and the spread of COVID-19?
Actually, this kind of investigation actually proposed by the Australian side is not an investigation. It's called an independent inquiry, talking about the lack of transparency That is actually the problem, because actually there's no such thing as lack of transparency in China, in the Chinese side.
The World Health Organization has been a disaster. Everything they said was wrong, and they're China-centric. All they do is they agree with China, whatever China wants to do.
Now, the State Department has even launched a campaign, Tweet for Taiwan, to gin up support, writing, "The world needs Taiwan in this fight. Tell at WHO it's time for Taiwan to be heard." Now, the State Department and U.S. officials at the United Nations are considering a whole range of options to hold the WHO accountable for aiding and abetting China, including the creation of a whole brand new global health body that would have more U.S. influence. Take a listen.
China behaved like authoritarian regimes do, attempted to conceal and hide and confuse. It employed the World Health Organization as a tool to do the same. These are the kind of things that have now presented this enormous crisis, an enormous loss of life, and tremendous economic cost all across the globe.
The WHO's Director General is pushing back against the U.S. daily, critiquing America's response to the pandemic without naming names. Take a listen.
The COVID-19 crisis has illustrated that even the most sophisticated health systems have struggled to cope with a pandemic.
I think you can really have it both ways. I think a lot of people want to go back. They just want to go back. You see it every day. You see demonstrations all over the country, and those are meaningful demonstrations. Oh, it's big stuff. But you also have some people that are very scared. Probably everybody's scared when you get right down to it.
Well, we're just 1 year away from a new ID requirement when it comes to flying domestically. Starting next October, you'll have to provide a real ID to fly or get into federal facilities. The form of identification meets increased security standards and is valid for up to 8 years.
Some countries are considering the use of an immunity passport or certificate to indicate that someone who had been infected with COVID-19 is now immune to the virus. From what we know right now about the tests that are able to measure an antibody response in an individual who has been infected with COVID-19, we don't know if that antibody response actually means that they're immune. These studies are currently underway. We're also concerned about the use of such a certificate because it may mean that someone who has the certificate will not adhere to public health measures that they need to continue to adhere to.
A new normal. A new normal.
A new normal.
Over 1.1 million people have downloaded the COVID Safe app. The health minister says that the government was expecting it would take 5 days to reach that number. It's hoping that 40% of smartphone users at least will take it up. Other countries using similar apps have seen significant surges initially, but that's plateaued well below the target. But Greg Hunt says every download helps authorities trying to trace the path of the virus. And once you've downloaded the app, it asks you for your phone number, your name, your age, range and a postcode. Using Bluetooth, it then logs any user you've been in a 1.5 metre radius of for more than 15 minutes. The government maintains that it is secure and that it doesn't trace anyone's location.
Welcome to your future. A digitally interdependent, hyper-connected, networked world. Throw off the tethers of ordinary reality and join the digitized multitudes ruled by global e-governance. With your very own new world citizen of the People's Federated Republic of the Great Democratic United Global States Incorporated chip card. Just one chip is now a key to every relevant database you are in on Earth. We're taking identification to a technocratic level beyond Aldous Huxley's wildest dreams and George Orwell's nightmares. One chip linked to your unique citizen number connects to all of your relevant societal business, including your passport, your driver's license, and all Federation-required licenses, titles, and registrations, your car, home, and medical insurance, all of your medical records, including your mandatory annual psychological evaluation, your DNA profile, and your prescriptions, your voter registration and history, and your bank account and digital universal basic income credits. But that's not all. Your blockchain-protected New World Citizen chip also gives you a digital footprint everywhere you go on the web, from online news sources to all of your social media accounts, authenticating you online to ensure a safe, peaceful, and secure society where no one can offend anyone else, because no one can hide. Continuous, real-time, 24/7 tracking and tracing will ensure a truly peaceful, digital utopia for all. No more fear of identity theft or forgetting those pesky passwords, as your digital citizen mark will be biometrically verified through your fingerprints, iris scan, EEG, voice print,
I'm sorry, Dave,
and facial map. From Cairo to Rome to Ingolstadt to Paris to Washington to Estonia and Astana. From ocean to ocean to ocean to heck, all of the oceans. Being a digital resident offers you a new concept of freedom to be a global citizen under your borderless digital new world order.
You're looking at one of Georgia's biggest farms, 7,000 acres, more than a dozen crops that help feed America. Seasonal foreign labor, mainly from Mexico, always harvests Brim's crops. But this spring, he could be 200 workers short. The coronavirus crisis has delayed the U.S. government's processing of their work visas. 70 miles away, Jeremy White is in bigger trouble. His blueberry crop is days away from harvest. He needs 100 pickers and packers.
As you can see, this fruit's turning blue and it's not waiting on anybody.
More than $1 million worth of blueberries could rot in the fields. He has no plan B.
Domestic labor just don't want to do this kind of work. It's unfortunate to say, but I mean, they just don't want to get out and do hard field labor anymore.
And restaurants usually buy 60% of his crops. Not this year. Not with so many restaurants closed.
Hope not. We hope and pray not. We're hoping this coronavirus will get out of here and we can go back to a little bit of normalcy.
Timing is now everything here. These crops can't wait. For CBS This Morning, Mark Strassman, Tifton, Georgia.
Phyllis Myers wanted a gun for months, but today was the day she came in to buy one, a Smith & Wesson 380.
They have sold 3 this morning.
And do they have a 4th for you?
No, we had to order online.
At gun stores across the country, guns and ammunition are selling at record levels. So much so that some gun stores are limiting ammunition purchases. A gun sales trade group says background checks were up 300% Monday over the same day last year. But why? The NRA told us Americans know that during trying times like these, first responder resources may be limited, and their safety is ultimately in their own hands.
It's comfort, right? You have the comfort knowing that I can protect my family and my loved ones if the time arose or need be, and I think that's just some peace of mind.
It's not all being met with open arms. There are scattered reports of cities across the country considering ammo or gun sales limits, but we can't find any actually enacted. The Brady campaign against gun violence warned it is understandable to seek what can feel like protection in times of upheaval, but we must acknowledge the risk bringing guns into the home pose.
What do you compare this to?
Nothing.
There's no comparison?
Not really.
I think what we're hearing most from both dealers and buyers is that they're sort of playing out these what-if scenarios to their ultimate end, and they're worried about some sort of breakdown and wanting to be able to take care of themselves.
Every 3 minutes in New York, someone dies from the coronavirus. The procession of bodies being wheeled out of the hospitals where they spent their last hours. A grim but now all too familiar scene.
Illinois' virus-related death toll continues to climb. The director of public health took time today to explain how the department rules someone an actual COVID death. It can be a little confusing. She says anyone who has COVID when they pass away will be included in that category. Dr. Ngozi Ezike explained this does not mean the virus caused that death, but if someone does test positive for COVID before dying, that is classified a coronavirus fatality.
You were in hospice and had already been given, a few weeks to live, and then you also were found to have COVID, that would be counted as a COVID death. It means that even if you died of a clear alternate cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it's still listed as a COVID death. So everyone who's listed as a COVID death doesn't mean that that was the cause of the death, but they had COVID at the time of death.
And we've talked about how important prior medical conditions, and in Italy, again, most of the individuals who succumbed to this disease had 3 other prior existing medical conditions. So we've been tracking very hard and putting out those warnings, the warnings about age, so people really understood. But this new data about the male-female ratio is really quite striking, and you're absolutely right. From age 50 on, almost twice as many men are dying as women.
I'm sure many of you saw the recent report out of the UK about them adjusting completely their needs. This is really quite important. If you remember, that was the report that said there would be 500,000 deaths in the UK and 2.2 million deaths in the United States. They've adjusted that number in the UK to 20,000. So 500,000 to 20,000. We're looking into this in great detail to understand that adjustment.
It's worth remembering again that the ONS rates are people who got COVID on their death certificate. It doesn't necessarily mean they were infected because many of them haven't been tested, so we just need to understand the difference.
There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem, some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
More than 23,000 Americans who have died from the coronavirus.
Now the deadliest nation in confirmed COVID-19 fatalities.
How many of those people had other health risks at play, though?
Cannot find anywhere the definition of what it means to die from this virus.
The idea that we're going to allow people to massage and sort of game the numbers is a real issue because we're going to undermine the trust.
For many years, the CDC has tracked the total number of Americans who die every week from pneumonia. For the last few weeks, that number has come in far lower than at the same moment in previous years. How could that be? Well, it seems entirely possible that doctors are classifying conventional pneumonia deaths as COVID-19 deaths. And that would mean this epidemic is being credited for thousands of deaths that would have occurred if the virus never appeared here.
And if everybody's being automatically classified, if they're found to have COVID-19 as a COVID-19 death, we're going to get a very large number of deaths that way, and we're probably not going to have an accurate count.
So those individuals will have an underlying condition, but that underlying condition did not cause their acute death when it's related to a COVID infection. In fact, it's the opposite.
You will always have conspiracy theories when you have very challenging public health crises. They are nothing but distractions.
I was just talking with the gentleman and whether he was actually concerned about spreading COVID-19. And he was telling me that he believes that it is being overblown and overhyped, the number of cases that is, suggesting that hospitals are using heart-related deaths or cancer-related deaths to add to those COVID-19 numbers.
Tonight, the discovery of an early death, rewriting the timeline of the COVID outbreak in America. 57-year-old Patricia Dowd died in Santa Clara County, California back on February 6th, 3 weeks before the first documented COVID death in the country.
There was some significant level of virus circulating in our community in early February, and who knows how much earlier.
New research finds that by March 1st, when the U.S. had just 23 confirmed cases, hidden outbreaks were spreading undetected in 5 major cities, including Boston, Seattle, Chicago, San Francisco, and New York, according to the New York Times. The actual number of cases then may have been at least 28,000.
Has come out and said that this COVID so far is less deadly than the flu, especially the 2018 flu, which had more hospitalizations and more deaths.
It's on testing. These tests are not 100% sensitive or specific. And I'm going to go over this over and over again. So if you have 1% of your population infected, and you have a test that's only 99% specific, that means that when you find a positive, 50% of the time it will be a real positive, and 50% of the time it won't be.
You're padding statistics. You know, you're putting people on that have COVID-19. If they didn't have it, you're making the death rate for New York City a lot higher than it should be.
To be honest with you, all of the death certificates they're writing COVID on, all of the death certificates, whether they had a positive test, whether they didn't. So I think, you know, again, this is my personal opinion. I think, like the mayor in our city, they're looking for federal funding, and the more they put COVID on a death certificate, the more they can ask for federal funds. So I think it's political. So I'm going to turn around and say, you know, like not everybody that we have here that has COVID on a death certificate died of COVID. Can I prove that? No, but that is my suspicion.
So you think that they're just putting it on everyone who's dying?
They're putting it on everybody's death certificate to make life easier for them, because like the causes of death get proved right away. If you write COVID, I mean, listen, they're just pushing things out because they're overwhelmed, and it's just easier to write COVID on everything. That's my opinion.
So this isn't like, we're not the first case of this happening?
Oh, absolutely not.
How often do you think this has happened?
Quite a lot. Quite a lot.
So you've seen like...
I couldn't give you a number, but quite a lot.
Okay. So you've seen other families at your funeral home?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've seen causes. I've seen people, you know, say COVID in families, somebody never tested, we don't know, and they're writing it anyway. Because if, you know what, the law allows them, like, if it's in their medical opinion, it allows them to write it. So they don't even have to prove it.
European patent, this is what I want you to see. This is very interesting. This patent is owned by a company called the Pirbright Institute. This is the European Patent Office, as you can see right there. I'm going to make it even bigger so you guys can see it. European Patent Office. And this is a patent, EP3172319A1 on coronavirus. Now, what's interesting is that this particular one here, this one, again, by the way, look at the application numbers. These are, if you look at who owns these, they're all, applicants are all this Pirbright Institute. I wonder who this Pirbright Institute is. Some of you could probably guess, but this is Pirbright. Now, so let's look up who Pirbright is. So let's go to the Pirbright and see. Look at this, Pirbright Institute, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Interesting, huh?
Saving lives is not easy. Sometimes we don't know how to prevent disease or death, which is tragic. But there are millions of lives we know exactly how to save. We can save them easily and cost-effectively with vaccines. I like to say that vaccines are miracles. They're miracles because giving children a couple of drops or a shot in the arm can prevent some of the worst childhood diseases for a lifetime. And that, to me, is a miracle.
We know vaccines can protect us.
We just need to be better prepared.
So let's
come together. Let's research
and invest. Let's save lives. Let's outsmart epidemics.
We're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms, and we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein. Taiwan comes close. They really were talking about it, and it's unfortunate they weren't part of WHO to really get those warnings paid attention to. We will get a vaccine, and the role of our foundation is to make sure that medicines like this are available to the entire world. We have partners like Gavi who will help us with that distribution. I'm sure governments will step up on this. And so, over the next couple of years, hopefully in 18 months, we'll get that vaccine. And for the world at large, normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population. But you don't have a choice. People act like you have a choice. If we have, 1 in 10,000 side effects, that's, way more, 700,000, people who will suffer from that. So really understanding the safety at gigantic scale across all age ranges, pregnant, male, female, undernourished, existing comorbidities, it's very, very hard. And that actual decision of, okay, let's go and give this vaccine to the entire world, governments will have to be involved because there will be some risk and indemnification needed before that can be decided on. There's a lot of dialogue between our foundation experts and the government now, but what does opening up look like? Which activities have, like schools, have such benefit and can be done in a way that the risk of transmission is very low?
Yeah.
And which activities, like mass gatherings, may be, in a certain sense, more optional. And so until you're widely vaccinated, those may not come back at all.
Already in Europe, many are saying the lockdown was a mistake. And just this morning, the pandemic models the world relied on have been slammed as hopelessly flawed.
These are people expressing their views. I see where they are and I see the way they're working. They seem to be very responsible people to me. But it's, they've been treated a little bit rough.
Look, if you're going out and thinking about protesting, I want you to think about this. If you don't care about infecting yourself, understand that your police, your fire and rescue have better things to do than to babysit you because you're angry that you can't go out for an ice cream or get your hair done. So think about who you're exposing.
If asymptomatic people go back to work, they could infect other people who could die.
Okay, that's an interesting hypothesis.
It's a fact.
Yeah, sure it is.
You don't believe that? That's science. That's indisputable.
That's interesting. If they're asymptomatic, how do they know that they have it or don't have it?
Well, they don't. That's the point.
So it's mysterious. So it's just this thing that they're saying.
So what, is this all a big conspiracy theory?
It's your conspiracy theory.
Cindy, what do you do for a living?
I am a nursing professor.
What brings a nursing professor to a rally at the Capitol when there's a coronavirus running around?
Well, I've done a lot of research. I definitely believe that more people have had the coronavirus than we will ever know.
Do you think the coronavirus is dangerous? What's your theory on it?
No, I'm not worried about the coronavirus. There's trillions of viruses around us. I think it's dangerous if you have a compromised immune system. And I think it's dangerous if you're elderly, but I think any cold or any flu or anything will be dangerous if you already have a comorbidity issue. All this social distancing, it's not healthy for us, it's not healthy for our children.
And I'm here, and what I think this is really about is grabbing our freedoms. I feel like there's a bigger agenda at play here, and that it's not about a virus, because there are over 300,000 viruses, I think, or more, in the world. So are we going to always be in fear? Are we going to always wear masks?
With his statement yesterday, and he was saying that basically he wasn't going to let any of us out until there was a vaccine. So I'm like, okay, now it's a vaccine issue.
This is all because of a vaccine mandate. They want the COVID vaccine. They want to keep us at social distancing until the vaccine comes out. Our governor just said that yesterday.
I'm worried about the coronavirus vaccine. If they mandate it, will the kids be able to go back to school? So, if we don't stand up for our kids, who will? So I'm here.
artificial immunity will never take the place of our God-given natural immunity. So I just taught a class on immunity.
My understanding of most nurses is the opposite is the belief system.
They're starting to wake up. It's just something they've been told. They've been conditioned to believe that, and I'm 62. I've never had a flu shot.
That's obviously what the bigger picture is they want a vaccine, they want to mandate that. And I believe they're using this as like a false flag event to do that.
If I have antibodies, does that mean I'm infected or does that mean I'm immune? Which is it? They're testing for genetic material, genetic sequencing. You know, how is that proof positive that I'm a danger to be close to you or someone else? And are we going to let the government tell us who's sick and who's not? You know, if I'm perfectly healthy and they're going to say I'm asymptomatic, are they going to rip me away from my family, my children away?
People all over, you can see by the size of this rally that was just spontaneously erupted within the last 24 hours, how many people are awake to the scams that are going on and have been going on in our country for decades. We were warned about this stuff from Eisenhower and Kennedy, and now it's manifesting.
Are we going to let the government tell us what we can wear on our bodies? Are we going to let them tell us what time to go home, that we can only go out of our home once a day to jog? That is pushing too far on my rights to walk about freely and move freely in my own country.
Out here because we're protesting the lockdown. It's a measure that's being used to control everyone, and it's not okay.
So you don't believe in the pandemic?
I believe that the virus is real, but it's not as bad as they're saying it is.
You don't lock the world up for a virus that has a mortality rate of less than 1%. This is tyranny. Within 5 weeks, I've seen my society, the world, completely change for the worse. We're being told this is the new normal. They're trying to condition us now that we have to accept this.
So what do you think the world's going to look like in, a month's time, 2 months' time if the lockdown carries on?
I think we will be living in a far worse kind of dystopian version of Nazi Germany.
Why do you think the government is doing this to people?
It's the government. They always want power.
I think they want to take over and control us with technology. I think they want to bring in a new kind of economy which is based on technological control, a new cryptocurrency, and I think they want to do it through medical tyranny. And I will fight to say no. I do it for my son, I do it for everyone's kids. I don't care if people ridicule me. There's going to be probably more waves of this virus that will be reported. Whether the virus is real or not is another debate. It's about the tyranny and it's about where it's taking us. I don't see us getting our rights back. Once governments take your rights away, they don't give them back to you.
Well, the policeman said that I shouldn't be around and ought to go home, and issued me with a ticket for associating with people in public.
How does that make you feel?
Well, it's an abomination and attack on human rights. This thing is aimed at preventing freedom of association. You see, it's not affecting people's health either way, this thing, because in Sweden they didn't have a lockdown and they didn't get much COVID. So, we know it's about something else. That's why I'm here protesting. They were heavy-handed, I would say, but not to the extent of assault or large numbers of arrests. They're really playing mental games, threatening people with measures if they continue freedom of association.
Were you threatened with arrest yourself?
I was. I've been threatened with arrest if I'm seen out again around here or anywhere today.
So directly leave the area. Leaving the area is not talking to the media. So you need to go.
Well, it's a freedom of expression.
It's not,
I'm not with other people.
It's not, sir. So you need to go home, please.
It's confronting to watch a mother ripped away from her young son as police moved on lockdown protesters in the CBD. Footage of the arrest has been played around the world, and a warning some people might find the vision distressing.
Taking a stand for her freedom, Renee El Takriti clashes with police.
My son is with me. I am not under arrest for anything. Why is she under arrest? You need to get your hands up.
Her 4-year-old son is scared.
Why is she under arrest?
You've got a baby. You ain't got the baby. Leave her alone.
The 36-year-old was one of about 40 people protesting against the coronavirus lockdown in the city yesterday afternoon.
Out of everybody, they grabbed a woman with a child. Out of everybody, this is shit.
The mother of 3 was fined for breaching social distancing and arrested for not giving police her name.
No, I'm not. I have not committed no offence. You're scaring my son. What offence has she done? Move away from me and my son. Move away.
They're ripped apart, her son kicking and screaming, held back by 2 officers.
In the midst of a lockdown, tensions rise. A rebellion in the heart of the city.
What's the charges? What's the charges?
As a woman is led into a police van, an enraged supporter lashes out, punching an officer before being dragged to the ground.
Move back! Move back!
Followers screaming for his release.
Move back! You've been told! Move back!
He was one of 10 demonstrators arrested on the steps of Parliament for breaching social distancing restrictions.
You're under arrest! You're under arrest, license in the back, watch out!
3 protesters will be charged with assaulting a police officer, as one member was taken to hospital with a rib injury. The crowd of about 300 demonstrating against Victoria's partial coronavirus shutdown, taking aim at mandatory vaccinations and the COVID-19 app.
They want to enforce a global microchip of humans!
We are here to ask questions and have them answered because things don't make sense.
Thanos Panayides, one of 2 organisers arrested at the lunchtime gathering, which attracted visitors from hundreds of kilometres away.
What virus are they going to spread? There is no virus out there they're going to spread.
I do not want anybody watching and tracking and listening to me breathe. I want transparency from the government.
None of this is law, so whatever fine I get is not law.
But the government disagrees. It says every person in attendance here today is in direct violation of social distancing rules and could be fined more than $1,600 each.
Masks should only be used by healthcare workers, caretakers, or by people who are sick with symptoms of fever and cough.
If you do not have these symptoms, you do not have to wear masks because there is no evidence that they protect people who are not sick.
This product is an ear loop mask. This product is not a respirator and will not provide any protection against COVID-19 or other viruses or contaminants.
I've seen lots of people wearing masks outside, but it's not Halloween. So why are people wearing costumes?
Well, those aren't costumes, Elmo. You know, just like doctors wear masks in hospitals when they take care of people, you're going to see people now wearing masks outside as well. And the reason they're wearing masks like this is to protect people in public from their germs and things like that. They don't want to spread your germs, and these masks can help with that.
Do as I say and as I do. Wear a mask. It's that simple.
While in hotspot Michigan, a security guard and father of 9 was shot and killed after stopping a woman without a mask from shopping, as he's required to do by law. 3 people have now been arrested.
This was extremely senseless over a mask.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. And you can see some of those protesters are still out here at the Capitol. Now, this was supposed to be a parade-style protest with about 500 people participating, and many did stay in their cars. But dozens of other folks, including families and even the elderly, stood side by side, not wearing facial coverings. Now, some said they were doing so to make a point.
So, guys, what's happening is we're sitting here and they're getting ready to go live right now. Or maybe they just did, but in the process, they're worried about the newscaster's mask looking right for the shot because it's just a prop. Obviously, you see the lady behind the camera. She chose not to wear the mask. And, of course, it comes down to a choice, right? But that's just probably not how they're playing it out right now in front of their audience.
Not wearing facial coverings, not wearing facial coverings, not wearing facial coverings.
We're playing it out like, and she touches, notice how she keeps touching her face, like more than you would ever touch your face if you didn't have a mask on. And we know that touching your face is how, it's the one way it spreads.
Hey, excuse me, can you back up? Come on,
No.
Can you
Oh, you can hear that?
Yes.
Oh, are you afraid of people hearing the truth?
I'm just afraid of you messing me up. Okay.
Okay, no, I understand.
Okay.
I'm afraid of you messing the country up by a false narrative. Well, the false narrative, you know. She's portraying it like she needs to wear a mask, and there's these people aren't wearing a mask, but you're not wearing a mask either behind the camera.
Now, I did reach out to CHP Capitol Protection in charge of the protest to get some of those questions answered. They said that a public information officer would be giving me a call back.
She just touched her face,
but right
more than
now,
you would
we still
if you
haven't received anything. Now, I do want
didn't
to
have a
mention
mask on,
that
that's
while
for sure.
covering
But
the story, we
like I
did
point
stay
out, the
6 feet
camera
apart
lady
from
does not
others.
have a mask.
I do also want to show you
The
guys,
one that just touched
we
her face
do have,
again.
A protester
The one that
out
just
here
touched
who
her
has
face
been
again.
heckling us
See her touch her
since
face
the
again?
moment we got
That's
here.
like
So
what you shouldn't
just want to let you
do.
guys know what that situation looks like out here for us. All right, reporting live at the Capitol. Turning it back to you guys.
All right, Mady Gomez, you stay safe out there, Mady.
And again, the lady behind the camera, no mask. So false narrative, because that's what fake news does. They try to control a narrative.
People there are just not worried about it, Cal? Are they not worried about their own personal safety?
I haven't met anybody who is. I met some folks actually from Lake Geneva who lived in the area. They were staying a few miles outside of town where I were, and they said they're worried about it. They're worried about that second spike. They're worried about folks coming in from Chicago. But they'll quickly add at the same time, this is a place that relies on that business. I think people here want a little bit more funding when it comes to these programs so that they could stay closed. But again, I think people felt like the Supreme Court made the decision here in Wisconsin that it was time to open up. But you can see here, just around. Nobody's wearing them. Nobody's. There you go, including the cameraman. Yeah, Katie.
Striking images, Cal Perry.
But again, I think people felt like the Supreme Court made the decision here in Wisconsin that it was time to open up. But you can see here, just around. Nobody's wearing them.
Nobody, including the cameraman.
There you go, including the cameraman. Yeah, Katie.
Exactly. Half your crew's not wearing them.
Striking images, Cal Perry. Cal, thank you very much.
Get out!
Is that crazy?
What do you think? She could not stay. She said you're not taking over this for my kid, bro. Y'all pulling the fuck out. What is that talking about? Because I had no mask. This way. Touch this, bro. Don't touch it. Do not touch. Bitch, don't touch it.
Yo, this is unnecessary. She got a kid with her. She got a baby with her. She got a kid with her, man. That's too much, man. Guys, for the taser. Let the orange out. What the f*** am I holding on to? Yo, you're gonna feel this, man. Look what the f*** calling me, dumbass. The f*** lay, huh? Right. Hey, don't seem like this. Take me a Close this door, man.
You should wear a mask when having sex. That's according to new research with Harvard University. The research ranked frisky situations based on how likely it is to catch coronavirus while in the act. The study says people having sex with people with whom they are not quarantined should wear a mask to prevent the spread of COVID-19. They say the safest practice, though, quote, not feasible for many, is abstinence.
That found that the COVID-19 virus could be found in the semen of infected men. Does that mean that this might be a sexually transmitted disease as well?
Yes.
There's a lot of safety science that's needed, and without the good science, we can't have good communication. So although I'm talking about all these other contextual issues and communication issues, it absolutely needs the science as the backbone. You can't repurpose the same old science to make it sound better if you don't have the science that's relevant to the new problems. So we need much more investment in safety science.
I think we cannot overemphasize the fact that we really don't have very good safety monitoring systems in many countries, and this adds to the miscommunication and the misapprehensions, because we're not able to give clear-cut answers when people ask questions about the deaths that have occurred due to a particular vaccine, and this always gets blown up in the media. One should be able to give a very factual account of what exactly has happened and what the cause of deaths are. But in most cases, there's some obfuscation at that level, and therefore there's less and less trust then in the system.
The other thing that's a trend and an issue is not just confidence in providers, but confidence of healthcare providers. We have a very wobbly health professional frontline that is starting to question vaccines and the safety of vaccines. When the frontline professionals are starting to question, or they don't feel like they have enough confidence about the safety to stand up to it, to the person asking them the questions. I mean, most medical school curriculums, even nursing curriculums, I mean, in medical school, you're lucky if you have a half day on vaccines, never mind keeping up to date with all this.
Dr. Fauci.
Dr. Fauci.
Dr. Anthony Fauci.
The one and only Dr. Anthony Fauci.
He's been a rare source of clarity in the Trump administration's response.
Dr. Fauci is a truth teller. He's science, knowledge, evidence, data, and that's what we have to have if we're going to have a cure.
Dr. Anthony Fauci has emerged as one doctor that just about everyone in America knows, a trusted scientific expert during this pandemic. And he was accustomed to leadership roles long before that. Did you know he was captain right here of his high school basketball team? And he was the academic leader of his peers when he finished first in his class right there at Cornell Medical School. Fauci also stepped into the lead professionally when working at the NIH in the early 80s, taking on what was then a strange new disease called AIDS.
When you have a respiratory illness that can be spread from person to person, and you have something that's global, and you have jet travel, nowhere in the world is completely safe when there's an epidemic raging in one part of the world. And since that's going on in China, we need to continue to be very vigilant. Right now, and we all admit that, right now, if we had an explosion of an H5N1, we would not be prepared for that.
You see this whole business with the H5N1 virus as an exercise to try and improve our capabilities of fighting off a pandemic?
Well, I don't see it as an exercise because it could be the big one. It could be. And if it is, our rushing around, doing what we need to do, pushing the envelope is not for naught or in vain.
I think of Dr. Fauci. Probably never heard of him. Well, you did. Ann heard him. He's a very fine research, top doctor at National Institute of Health, working hard doing something about research on this disease of AIDS.
It's not only safety when you inject somebody and they get maybe an idiosyncratic reaction, they get a little allergic reaction, they get pain. There's safety associated. Does the vaccine make you worse? And there are diseases in which you vaccinate someone, they get infected with what you're trying to protect them with, and you actually enhance the infection. We're going to try and make sure we don't have enhancement. So the worst possible thing you could do is vaccinate somebody to prevent infection and actually make them worse.
One of the things that we're not hearing a lot about is the unique potential safety problem of coronavirus vaccines. This was first found in the early 1960s with the respiratory syncytial virus vaccines, and it was done here in Washington with the NIH and Children's National Medical Center, that some of those kids who got the vaccine actually did worse. And I believe there were 2 deaths in the consequence of that study, because what happens with certain types of respiratory virus vaccines, you get immunized, and then when you get actually exposed to the virus, you get this kind of paradoxical immune enhancement phenomenon. And we don't entirely understand the basis of it, but we recognize that it's a real problem for certain respiratory virus vaccines. That killed the RSV program for decades. Now the Gates Foundation is taking it up again. But when we started developing coronavirus vaccines, and our colleagues, we noticed in laboratory animals that they started to show some of the same immune pathology that resembled what had happened 50 years earlier.
I'm also pleased to report today that a vaccine candidate has begun the phase 1 clinical trial. This is one of the fastest vaccine development launches in history. I have to say that our government is prepared to do whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, we're doing.
I think we're going to have a vaccine by the end of the year. We're doing very well with the vaccine. And I will tell you something. I just literally left a meeting. We're mobilizing our military and other forces, but we're mobilizing our military on the basis that we do have a vaccine. You know, it's a massive job to give this vaccine. Our military is now being mobilized. So at the end of the year, we're going to be able to give it to a lot of people very, very rapidly.
And then finally, we'll be moving towards this mass vaccination campaign and continuing to follow. And I want you to know that CDPH is already deep in the planning stages around vaccination. We've already bought the syringes. We already know where it's going to happen. We're thinking about what that's going to be. It's all part of this plan.
The United Kingdom says it's fast-tracked a coronavirus vaccine, which will be trialled in humans from tomorrow.
Announcing a vaccine developed by Oxford University will be trialled in humans from tomorrow.
In normal times, reaching this stage would take years.
Let's start the pledging.
The EU kicked off its fundraising drive with €1 billion. In the hours that followed, pledges were beamed in from across the globe.
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has pledged $500 million.
Even pop icon Madonna made a last-minute donation of €1 million. Germany was one of the leading donors, pledging over €500 million. The money is earmarked for international health organisations and research networks in a bid to speed up the development of a vaccine.
Better diagnostics, treatments, and a safe and effective vaccine.
COVID-19 diagnostics, therapeutics and vaccines.
Largement du développement et du déploiement rapide de diagnostics, vaccins et traitements efficaces.
Universal access to vaccination, treatment and diagnostics.
Equitable access to new COVID diagnostics, therapeutics and vaccine.
We must all work together on improving diagnostics, accelerating therapies, and ultimately developing a vaccine.
We need to make vaccines, treatment and diagnostics accessible to everyone.
We need new diagnostics, vaccines, treatments, and an equal distribution to all.
On equitable access to diagnostics, treatments and vaccines.
But some forces have been criticised. Derbyshire Police has defended this video it published last week, which used a drone to show people visiting the Peak District. A former Supreme Court judge called it disgraceful and says police have to separate government advice from enforceable laws.
They do not prevent people, for example, from driving to beauty spots to take their exercise there. They don't prevent people from buying things that the police might consider to be non-essential foods. They don't prevent all sorts of things that the police in some parts of the country have been trying to prevent.
But there is specific behaviour the police can enforce. They might send or take people back to where they live if they're out for anything other than daily exercise or picking up essential items. They can instruct groups of 3 or more to go home and can fine people who are outside without a valid reason.
South Wales Police fine a woman who was sitting all by herself on a park bench, not a threat to anyone. You can't even use a public toilet if you get caught short in some of our parks down there. If you know, during one of your moments that you're allowed of exercise out of the house. See that sign on the side? It says don't use. You can't even give your dog a drink from the tap.
An Easter Sunday allegedly spent breaching isolation rules. Police quick to act.
You've been told you're under arrest. Yeah? All right, no worries, I'm under arrest.
Tempers flaring after 2 men were fined, 2 others warned. They say they were just eating together.
Look how much places I've got just for a ticket.
We're going to the beach?
Sir, in a white shirt. Get out there! Get out there! Get out there! Civil disobedience!
What are they doing?
Leave them alone! They got the right to be at the meeting.
Hold your ground! Hold your ground!
Come on, you gotta know it's wrong. We outnumber them! Government? All right! Let's go! Reopen the beaches!
Open the whole beach. I'm sorry. The breach has been opened. She opened the breach. Woo!
This is how bus trips now start in the South African township of Soweto.
Please have your mask on.
Filing through a metal tunnel, passengers are sprayed with disinfectant mist as part of a pilot designed to help stop the spread of coronavirus.
We are hoping to reduce the numbers of people that are infected.
In France, where citizens are emerging from weeks of strict lockdown, the government has made wearing masks on public transport mandatory. But Victorian authorities don't believe that's necessary here, instead focusing their efforts on regular cleaning of buses, trains and trams.
Every player, unless they're from the same household, has to bring their own tennis balls so that you don't touch other people's tennis balls with your hands. You can kick their balls, but you can't touch them. I'm going to blush, sorry. Of course, if you're playing with someone in your household, you can touch those tennis balls. To avoid confusion between whose balls are whose, you can use a marker, like a Sharpie, to mark out, to put an X or put someone's initials on them.
To wear on your head so you don't come close to anyone.
Dolores Park has a new look now to help with social distancing. Take a look. The Recreation and Parks Department painted white chalk circles all around the park in the Mission District. Each circle is about 6 feet wide. The city hopes those circles will help people keep a safe distance away from each other, at least from people who are not part of their household, while they're enjoying the park and the outdoors.
What about this today, that despite the fact that, of course, the World Health Organisation screwed up as much as it possibly did, all of the big state, deep staters saying we must lock everyone away forever, now they're going to turn around and lecture us about the mental health implications of the decisions they made us take, Senator, where apparently there is about to be a lockdown generation, a generation that, of course, is ruined because, guess what? They weren't able to go to school. They weren't able to go to university. They weren't able to have their casual job. And now, as we start to step out of all of those restrictions, they're, of course, going to be denied being able to go and get all of those jobs. I love this. The World Health Organisation couldn't have stuffed up worse. Many of the authoritarian governments, or even the ones that just enjoyed being, authoritarian curious of the past few weeks. Well, guess what they've done? Exactly what we've always said they would do, which is screw an entire generation. Now the UN want to tell us that it's our fault and we have to fix it. I'm sorry?
Well, new details this morning in the death of George Floyd. The county autopsy shows he was positive for COVID-19. That came from a nasal swab performed after his death.
The severe economic and social damage of the coronavirus lockdowns will be monstrous. 40% or more of businesses will never reopen. Millions of jobs will be lost, and trillions of monopoly dollars will be created out of thin air. Thanks to the government's overreaction, billions of lives will be ruined through inflation, depression, domestic violence, starvation, murder, suicide, and more. Have you noticed the coming destruction, but been accused of only caring about money? Or told that if the lockdown saved just one life, it's worth it? Have you been called heartless or told to follow the science? Because science tells us something is very wrong, and your freedom, experiences, and ability to take care of your family are vanishing. If this isn't stopped soon, they'll be gone forever. But Bill Gates, his elite friends, and the world's governments will continue as long as you let them. And their cure is worse than the disease. But you see through it, and you're probably wondering what you can do. Join the movement to save our planet. Wake up your friends, family, coworkers, local business owners, and everyone you care about.
Police and security guards in Belgium were caught flat-footed today by a cowardly sneak attack on one of the world's wealthiest men. The target was Microsoft Chairman Bill Gates, arriving for a meeting with community leaders. Watch what happens when a team of hitmen meet him first with a pie in the face. Gates was momentarily and understandably shaken, but he was not injured. The hit squad piled on with two more pies before one of them was wrestled to the ground and arrested. The others, for at least the moment, got away. Gates went inside, wiped his face clean, and made no comment. He then went ahead with his scheduled meeting. No word on the motive for this attack.
Morning, Lucy. That was a pretty long walk today. Yeah, well, you owed me 3 days. I was sitting there in the house by the door. I'm sorry, Lucy. It's okay. Just don't do it again. It's called the Lucy and Jeff show, you know. You can't just do it without me. I know, Lucy. I know. Let's go get some tacos. Okay. You got me. You had me at tacos. That's my girl. Here's a taco. Okay. You're forgiven. Oh, yeah, it's good. It's real good.